Hi, I'm Leta Soza.
Excellent. We're so excited to have you guys and excited to move forward with this conversation. So, tonight we're going to talk about a few different things. It's just family tonight, it's just Lita and myself. We look forward to having some extra awesome guest stars next week or next episode, whenever that might be. But in the meantime, what we're going to talk about today, we've got a new segment called Did You Know? Did you know about Black excellence in America? So, we're going to be telling some stories, and today we're going to be talking about remind me his name one more time.
So his name is James Hemmings.
James Hemmings. He's got a very
Yes.
interesting tale. So I'm excited to have Lita bring that to you guys. After that, we are going to endeavor to rediscover and redefine the terms racism and racist and sort of update them because I know that's a really hot ticket sort of phrase right now. And we're just going to dive into that a little bit and see what we can discover. And then we're going to wrap it up with our segment Walk the Runway, which are actionables that you can take with you on your journey to change yourself and the system. So that is about it. So, Lita, did you
Yes.
know?
Did
First of
you?
all,
did
first,
did you? Sorry. Go
did you?
ahead.
Did you know?
Did you? Did you?
First of all, how have you been doing since the last we spoke?
I'm doing well. First of all, I just want to express my appreciation again for the dialogue that we had previously with our phenomenal guests and for the continuation of that dialogue. For me, it's not only is it super enlightening, these conversations are always super enlightening, but they're soul filling. And also, I just wanted to express my appreciation for everybody who watched our dialogue or any part of our dialogue in the last episode. It really means a lot. And obviously, those who provided feedback, even more so. This is not just about us. This is about all of us. So we invite all feedback and deeply appreciate any time that you invest with us. So, but I'm very excited about this new segment. Did you know?
Yes.
Because I think there's so much Black excellence that just doesn't get the kind of love and spotlight that it deserves, and so I came across this story actually right after we had our last conversation, and it just felt like a perfect personification of the kinds of voices that we're looking to elevate in this new offering. So I want to talk about America's first culinary connoisseur, which most people, I would venture to guess, would not think was a African American man, but it is.
Yeah.
So what's really fascinating is this little spotlight is actually from a series that this really amazing writer named Edward White has been putting out like monthly columns in the Paris Reviews, and it's all about serving up lesser told stories of chefs that are cooking at interesting times. I mentioned this in our first episode, but my thing that I love to pollinate wherever I go is deliciousness. And so when this spotlight on America's first culinary connoisseur crossed my path, I was blown away that I didn't know anything about this. So I think one of the most interesting things, and this goes back to also education and history and how that's taught, is Thomas Jefferson is often regarded as America's first kind of connoisseur. And that actual term was emerged in like 18th century Paris. And Jefferson lived in Paris from like, I think it was like 17 like mid 1780s 84 to like 89. He had a solid like 5 year stint living in Paris, and that's where that term connoisseur kind of emerged from, because he was a Renaissance man. He participated in all the arts and would have these lavish dinners. And so but what was really interesting is that he took all of those things that he learned in Paris and sort of the personification of them as we know it was at Monticello, right? And so all of that is very much attributed to Jefferson. But for 9 years in Paris, in Virginia, in Philadelphia, it was actually his trusted protege, his brother in law, and his slave James Hemings, who was the accomplished chef behind all of those lavish dinners and parties that are renowned, that Jefferson is renowned for, and that are attributed to him. So yeah. And so it was actually Hemmings who produced this sophisticated haute cuisine with kind of the Southern twist that we sort of know as Jeffersonian cuisine. And so what happened was his talents emerged when Jefferson took Hemmings to Paris with him in the mid 1780s to basically get a first-rate culinary education from Europe's most illustrious chefs, which is kind of crazy to think about. Yet every moment that Hemmings spent in Jefferson's kitchens was in servitude, right? Which is just, so his biography, it only appears to us in like faded snatches here and there, and there's very little we know about his personal life outside of his culinary creativity, and even that isn't attributed to him.
Right.
And it just sort of exemplifies this strange paradox that has kind of come to represent the public image of Thomas Jefferson. And then obviously, in turn kind of exemplifies the paradox of that age. So I don't want to give any more away about the life and history of James Hemings. I would encourage everybody to check out the Paris Review article. It is one of the most fascinating reads. And then I would also encourage you that if you love to cook, or even if you just love food, this is a really great reminder to dig a little deeper into the roots of the cuisine and the dishes that we know and love to really uncover their true roots.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Thank you for telling us about that. It just, first of all, it's beautiful. It's nice to know that it's like a treasure that we're now going to be finding as we uncover these stories and these gems throughout history that we've sort of been denied in our history books. Um, it's beautiful, but at the same time, it's tragic because had we known these things before, we might have a more full and whole society, acknowledging everyone's contributions to the whole. But that's fantastic. And I think it's just a great example of a seemingly small story, a small tale that can really change your mind about the social structure, because that seems small, but branching away from that, there's, like you said, the sort of Jeffersonian idea of a menu, which is some of him, but also a lot of the man that was actually doing the cooking, and feeding these parties and adding to what was elite culture at that time, which is, gone down in history.
I mean, it's genre creation,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's interesting because even you look. Let's just take like music, like you boil it down, or you start to unsheath it, and you realize that the African American and Black people are often at the fulcrum of like the greatest movements and genres of every era.
yeah.
So just another personification of that, and very grateful that I now know James Hemmings' name, and am more encouraged to excavate deeper when it comes to food and cooking.
Indeed. And it should be said because I think the connection to history that most people will know that this James Hemings is also related to Sally. And of course, we all know the Sally Hemings story with Thomas Jefferson. Just another twist on that tale, So,
Yeah.
very fascinating. Yeah. So, we'll be right back. We're going to start this with a little dance ins. Bring it down. Break it down. Hello and welcome back. We are on to our next topic, which is how can we redefine the terms racist and racism, while of course honoring what the term has already meant historically. So first, I want to talk about some of the things that have been coming up for me as a Black man since we had the first episode and the first conversation and the many conversations that have been inspired since it. And also just the new stuff and the crazy stuff that's going on in society that is really waking up a lot of stuff in me. So, there are a lot of well-meaning people out in society right now, well-meaning white people, I can say specifically, that are taking up a call of action and that are out in the streets wanting to make change and actually making change. There have been some really brilliant policy changes that we've all come together to make happen. One of the things that's been coming up for me is that the conversation being had between white people and Black people has maybe reached a tipping point in that we've had a chance to express to each other the sorrow that we feel for one another, and the rage and the angst and all of the emotions. But I think that the tide is now churning and we have to look for a different way to start having the conversation. And the conversation now begins to need to be
Sure does.
that conversation now needs to be.
And it's the bee's knees.
And it's the bee's knees. I've been seeing that the tide and the conversation has been churning, and perhaps what needs to happen now is that while Black people sort of heal from their past and current traumas, I mean, people are now in the news continuing to be murdered, and it's a lot of stuff from our past is coming up. While we deal with that, I think it's now time, this is just my personal opinion, for the white community to turn into itself and begin to have the conversation about how to move the change forward, because we need time to heal and recollect ourselves. And I feel like it's time for a different group to take up the mantle and the action, because frankly, we're tired. You know what I mean? We're tired. We're just tired. That's all. Leta, what do you think about that?
I couldn't agree more. It goes to it's sort of it feels like it maps to this idea of we want things to change, but we still are looking for guidance instead of like creating that guidance for ourselves, right? Making other people provide us the structure instead of looking around and being like, we got what tools we got. Let's like start to build something that's going to help us be better and more active allies. I think that's a really important point that you bring up. I'm so glad that you brought it up, because also I think one of the most important things that white people can do is to come together and speak the words out loud, I am a racist, because every single person who is a part of a racist system who is not being oppressed is complacent in that system. And I think that it is vitally important that we become comfortable saying those words so that we can begin to unpack what needs to shift and change within ourselves in order to dismantle that system and build a new one. I also think that it speaks to the need of white people to learn how to not crumble the minute that something that is critical is said to them about themselves. And I think this speaks a little bit to how what you were saying about redefining the term. The term has been like, if I said you're a racist, that means that you are an immoral person who is negatively seeking, like actively seeking to harm someone based on race. And that simply just isn't nuanced enough. We need to be able to learn how to name the demon that exists within all of us, and identify where the patterns of thought, where the actions that we take are holding up the system that has been responsible for oppressing so many people. That's where my brain goes.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying with that, and I heard what you're saying about the tools, and I think in these past couple of weeks, the dialogue has moved to a place, especially if you are a cultural Kikier, The dialogue has moved to a place where you now have some tools that you didn't have before. So now, with what tools you have, how can you begin to build the next platform to reach the next level and reach the next level? And I think that is what needs to happen here, because at a certain point, continuing to talk with us about this, and by us I mean the Black community, white people talking to Black people, continuing to talk to us and console us has sort of reached its expiration date. And what we want to see is action, you know? So how are you going to take the tools? We've opened up ourselves, we've exposed ourselves in many ways. There are a lot of different avenues and resources through which Black people have been opening themselves up to the world and, you know, digging through the cultural muck that it is to be a Black American and exposing that. So how can you take that information and begin to redefine your action palette? And perhaps instead of calling your next Black friend for advice, go and look up one of the many videos or resources that are on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, social media, where you can get the tools that you feel you need if you don't have enough tools already, and begin to build from that point. So I really want to talk about now actually defining and sort of nuancing what that concept of racism and racist means. So I guess I'll start with my perspective on it. Um, Racism really has to do with, racism is a form of classism, where there's a certain class of people that are inherently used to a structure that is beneficial and open to them, and in that comfortability are not concerned with that structure being oppressive to others. And that can come in really small ways, medium ways, and large ways. Of course, the classic definition are the large ways or even the medium ways, when there are racists out killing people because of the color of their skin, or police officers out pulling people over because of the color of your skin. But there are small ways in which you might do it, in which you might clutch your purse as a Black man walks by, or get a little nervous as one crosses your car door, or you see one in your neighborhood and you might wonder where he came from. I was driving in my car not too long ago on a joyride, and I happened to drive a very nice car, and I was in a nice neighborhood. I needed to make a U-turn before I got to the intersection, so I ducked off into a little cul-de-sac, and as I made my way around, there was an older white woman out walking her dog that made it her business to stop and stare at me perplexedly as to what I could possibly be doing making a U-turn on this street. So those are the microaggressions that one might begin to re-examine when they talk about racism. Lita, what do you think?
Yes, I also was just thinking about the terms, I live in a good neighborhood, my kids go to a good school.
Mhm.
Those automatically signal it's white, right? And good means the absence, likely the absence of anyone of color. In that it's
That's
sort of
generally what that community means, that it's a good neighborhood. It's the absence of people of color. And
exactly.
and let's be direct. It's the absence of Black people, because you can have Asian people in a good neighborhood. You know what I mean? I would say
Yeah.
it's probably the absence of Black and Latino people. You know?
Yeah, and I think it just it serves to illustrate again the nuance of the word racist, right? Like that's not me seeking to intentionally harm. Like of course everybody wants to live in a good neighborhood or send their kids to a good school, but what that inherently and unconsciously signals, again, it's unconscious bias, and it's we need to bring more consciousness around the weight and the meaning of the words and what those signal, and then what choices we make as a result of, like, well, I'm going to choose, an up and coming neighborhood, it's getting whiter, like versus
Yes. Yes.
so I just there's a lot of power in language, that I think is very important for us, that signals both consciously and unconsciously.
Yes. And, there's been a huge conversation about white people now, well, at least in my circle, and, I have to admit that I have a very sort of progressive, artistic, um, I guess I could say liberal circle, but it's more a global circle than anything. But there's been this big conversation about white people at all levels, sort of breaking down and examining their own racism and being willing to call themselves racist at whatever level that might happen to be, because again, being both complacent and complicit in this system has had its effect on your Black neighbors. So
I think one of the most important things that white people need to teach themselves how to do is to receive the feedback when we've stepped in and made, again, like we've the discomfort of being called a racist or having something that we've done or said be called out by a person of color. I think we need to, one of the greatest things we could do is to learn how to accept that feedback with grace and reflect on it, and then move to action that is going to shift that the next time. I think that's one of the most important pieces of work that any white person, and the type of work that we as white people need to be talking to each other about, because that, with the lack of that, we're just not going to have any dialogue, and then we just fall to pieces, and then there's no forward movement. It's just, or that we could possibly be complicit in a racist system.
Right. And I think that you hit another nail on the head, and to take what you said and move it perhaps a step forward, is that when you say that white people should be talking to each other, there's a lot of criticism, obviously, from Black people to white people about racist actions of all shades and sizes. But I think a step beyond that, the more important question is critiquing yourself. What have you done, and what do you do that is inherently racist and sort of born out of your training? And here's, I think, the thing that really needs to be realized is that we have been trained. We talked about this in episode 1, from our classroom experience, which is very formative for us, and from the home experience in ways that we don't even realize, what's on our television, what's being said on television shows. We all have this training, and we all experience it. We have to go way back and understand where that training comes from so that we can begin to dismantle it. Because it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm racist because, I do clutch my purse when a Black man walks by, or I do tense up, when a Black person walks by. That has come from a training. Where does that training start? So we're definitely going to talk about that in our Walk the Runway segment, where we can talk about where those things have come from and what actions you can take to continue to unearth that for yourself. Because as you see the roots of it, you can begin to dismantle the roots of it. But it's not until you pick that plant out of the soil can you see what was wrong with the soil, what's wrong with the root rot, and all those gardening things that I'm into these days. Leta knows what I'm talking about. She's a gardener.
Yeah, I think the unearthing is key to really embodying and being the change that so many of us are wanting to and willing into fruition.
Indeed. And I think that the last thing to say about this before we segue into our Walk the Runway segment, how you doing, is perhaps those good deeds. I know that there's a lot of posting on social media right now. Again, white people, Black people, all kinds of people, but perhaps the energy of the white person is best spent now working on yourself and working on your immediate community. I see a lot of people out protesting. We're going to talk about that in a second. But don't tell us about the good deeds. Just get out there and do them, and do them, and do them, and do them until the change is so profound that we never have to talk about it again. You know what I mean? So let's talk about that and what other actions we can take in the next segment. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to A Cultural Kiki with Christopher Liddell and Leta Soza. So now we are at my favorite little new section called Walk the Runway. Actionables that you can take with you as you change yourself and change society. So I have a pointed question for you, and it's the question that is at the root of this movement and the root of your new movement. So I want you to brace yourself for it, and I'm going to read it just so I make sure that I get it right. Mind you, walk the runway. These are actionables. So here we go. Ask yourself, a friend, and a family member, in what way, small or large, have you sat back and been comfortable while your Black neighbor gets ravaged? That brings up a lot of stuff for me because it doesn't really matter how well-meaning we've been up until this point. If you've been comfortable watching this happen to Black people, then that is what we were talking about in the previous segment, redefining racism. Inherently, there is some racism in that because you can afford to be comfortable. The system allows you to be comfortable while we get torn apart. So that's really something that you want to start your own self-dialogue with and start the dialogue amongst your loved ones, your friends, your family members that are specifically white. And let's be real, there's someone in your family that is of the generation that is the kind of racist that wants to harm other people because of the color of their skin. And let's hope not. But in a lot of families, those are the people that are causing the most harm right now. Those are the people that you really need to be talking to and making sure that they are examining their actions and holding them responsible for the harm that they're causing and putting out into society. Leta, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think that the most the most important thing you said was that you've had the comfort and opportunity to avert your eyes and not say something about seeing a person of color or a neighbor or whomever, ravaged in whatever way that looks like.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
So
that's
that's an
privilege.
interesting. That is the definition of privilege. You know what I mean? It really is, and
You
it's
have the
worth
choice. Yeah.
when you have a choice. Exactly, exactly. So let's take this a step further. I want you to just imagine what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. When we watch movies, television, even cartoons, we very easily put ourselves in the place of the people that we're watching. You know what I mean? When something happens to them on screen, we flinch with them, or we love with them, or we cry with them. Why aren't we doing the same thing with our neighbor? And when I say our neighbor, I mean the Black people in society, our societal neighbors. We have to, you, not we, you have to put yourself in the place of a Black person for a second. So, have you imagined what it's like to have the legitimate fear that if you get pulled over, it might be a life or death sentence right there on the street? I mean, I would venture to say that most white people would view getting pulled over by the police as a nuisance, not something to be deathly afraid of. You might just be jogging. You might be sleeping in your car or even in your bed. And someone would seek to not only harm you, but kill you based on the color of your skin. And, obviously, people of all types have a fear and different types of anxiety when they go out in the world. But there's a different type of anxiety that, first of all, has been taught since birth to Black people that is solely based on the way that we look. And that, quite frankly, is unfair. So put yourself in someone else's shoes. Take 10 minutes, do a 10-minute meditation on what it might be like to be Black for that 10 minutes. Going into a crowd of, let's say, mostly white people and being looked at strangely, like you've got dirt on your face. I can't tell you how many times I've experienced that just by walking into a room of mostly white people, drawing all of this uncertain attention and uncomfortability. And I'm sure that you, as white people, do walk into rooms and feel awkward and uncomfortable, but it's not because of the color of your skin. Examine what it's like to experience life through that lens. Lita, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's about really sort of decoupling the I know what it's like to feel anxiety or dread because it's an emotional internal versus there is a physical attribute that is driving that I have zero control over. I think that's a very different kind of uh, exercise in empathy.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's really important right now, if you're going to make the kind of changes that people say that they want to make, we really have to put ourselves in, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, as they say. So, in that vein, there are a couple of specific things, besides asking yourself, your family members, and your friends those questions. There are a couple of things that I really want to examine because it's stuff that's been coming up for me lately, some traumas that have been coming up. I want to talk about examining double standards. The history of double standards, as far as Black people and white people in this country, is long standing and quite ridiculous. I'm going to give us maybe, let's say, 3 examples. Jazz, when it was formed by Black people in the South as a way of expressing ourselves in oppression, was initially seen by the white media and the white population as the devil's music. Give it another decade to 15 years, and white people have taken over the genre in a Glenn Miller type fashion and began to profit from something that they had decried 10 or 15 years before. We can move to the 90s, where I experienced a lot of racism and social angst because of the hip hop movement, because Black people were expressing themselves through a new form that's, a descendant of jazz. And we were dressing in a certain way to represent ourselves. And that was seen as, that sort of gangster look was, again, for lack of a better term, poo-pooed by the white audience. And I was not allowed to dress that way because it gave off a certain image as Black people that we did not want to hand over. There was this pervasive sense that that a certain section of the Black population always had to be responsible for their outward image because it represented Black people as a whole. Mm-hmm. So then you take that forward another 10, 20 years, and the hip hop audience is now mostly young white people going down the street. I was just somewhere the other day in a really nice neighborhood where some white boys passed by in a truck blasting hip hop music and nobody turned a head. 10, 15 years ago, when Black people were doing that, that was cause to call the police. It's still cause to call the police on Black people. What is the double standard there? My final example is that I've been seeing on social media that there are a lot of white protesters. And again, we love anybody that's out there fighting for this cause, but it brings up a lot of stuff sometimes. And these protesters were taking a knee, Colin Kaepernick style, for how many ever minutes and seconds were prescribed to do so. And while it was a proud moment for me, I was sort of struck with a lightning type emotion almost simultaneously, that when Colin Kaepernick did it as a Black man, it cost him his career. And now that white people are doing it, it gives it permission to be okay. And now anybody can do it without consequence. So examining the double standards that have been long held throughout society, is really a big issue and a big leap forward in having this conversation of what is racism and how do white people continue to benefit and profit off of Black ideas that are at one moment torn down when they belong to Black people and then quietly taken and being made into profit by white people. So, that was a lot.
I do want to ladder on one thing that I know from attending a couple of protest gatherings, and often the kneeling is done in order to hammer home the point of how long that officer kneeled on George Floyd's neck, so that people can really feel the length of that time and honor that time. So there is that, but I do not disagree with anything you shared. I just want to add in that nuance there that I do know ladders to that specific action.
Thank you. And that is a really interesting dichotomy now that you bring it up, and thank you. Because one black man took a knee and stirred up the country, and another white man took a knee and stirred up the country.
Oh, that's
And
super interesting.
that's very interesting. So thank you for bringing that up. And you're right, because I have a lot of friends that are out in protest right now. And this is my manner of protest, getting these conversations going and sort of doing, the opposite end of that actionable work. So thank you for illuminating me on that, because that's a really important point. So now that we've gotten that examined, I think that the next way that people can really move forward, white people especially, but I think people of all colors, anybody that lives in this country, anybody that lives on this globe, needs to re-examine the way that America was founded. I know that we have a broad stroke of the genocide that took place to found this country, but I think that when we really take a deeper dive into the men that were directly involved in building this country and the kind of people they were, that will begin to shed a different light on the way that we feel about the system that they built that is still in place, that needs to be redefined. Leta, take it away, sister.
Yeah, I think the guy that just like, I mean, we talked about Thomas Jefferson and James Hemings at the top of this episode, but I also want to call out, that a lot of these lauded male figures that are attached to our historical gravitas, there's a lot of nuance there that we simply haven't unearthed or really connected them to the underpinnings of this systemic system that we are trying to and are in the attempts of dismantling. And I just want to bring up the example of Andrew Jackson, who was the reigning president at the end of the Civil War and was supposed to be responsible for Reconstruction and making sure that freed slaves got the reparations and the land and everything that they had been promised. And he basically reneged on all of that and started into motion a lot of the policies and procedures that are the literal foundation of so many of the systemic issues that our society is navigating and exploring today. I just want to read this really interesting little fact that I came across about Andrew Jackson, which doesn't have specifically to do with Black people, but it does have to do with another minority population, Indigenous people. So just wanted to read this. So Andrew Jackson was the president between 1829 and 1837. And Jackson supervised his men mutilating around 800 corpses of Creek Indian men, women, and children. To keep a record of how many they had killed, he ordered their noses be cut off, creating a pile of hundreds of severed noses. Strips of skin were also sliced from the bodies to tan and be used as bridle reins for his horse.
Oh my goodness. Savagery.
Savagery, right? And yet, those are the kinds of nuances of our founding fathers that are not elevated, and we need to be really examining the people that have built this country and the parts of themselves that have been mired and hidden in the shadows, but were directly driving the choices that they made, which has created the system in which we all exist today.
Yes. And that system still allows for noses to be cut off and skin to be stripped off, metaphorically, but not so much so. I mean, we're still doing that kind of harm to people, just in different ways.
And even just empowering actions. Like I just saw that in Oakland, in Lake Merritt, in Oakland, right? That there were nooses found hanging from trees today around one of the most populated parts that are and parts of our city that is highly trafficked and is known to be a gathering safe place for all people of this city and beyond. And it's these kinds of leaders and voices that have allowed that to continue to be, think that allowed to that kind of action is doable. It's created the space for that.
And I think that's where, again, we have to ask for the white community to, anybody within the sound of my voice, if you know anyone that would do something like hanging a noose from a tree or hanging someone from a tree, it is your responsibility to intervene. I don't know what exactly that means, depending on the severity of the severity of the intent, but this is what needs to stop. And if Black people could stop it, we would have done so already.
You gotta do it.
So the responsibility lies with the white community there. So moving on from that place of now emotional and mental shift and understanding, here are some maybe more casual things that you can do to begin to move your consciousness forward. So I've got 3 easy Instagram accounts for you guys to follow that will just put something in your feed every day that will begin to re-educate you. The first one is @AfricanArchives. These are all on Instagram. The next one is a smaller account and just an Instagram friend of mine, Douglas Wood _70. And the third is just a celebration of Black beauty, because I do feel that in our media, Black people are often robbed of our inherent beauty. So this is called CN, N as in Nancy, CNB TV, which is just a celebration of Black beauty, and we'll put some beautiful Black people on your feed to see on a daily basis. And don't we all love that? So Leta, what you got?
I love that. I want to throw another beautiful Black person in your Instagram feed. I cannot shout out enough Sophia _Roe, ROE. She is a beautiful entrepreneur and activist based in New York, but she hosts these gorgeous conversations called Pillow Talk sessions. Who doesn't love some pillow talk?
Okay.
Oh, yes. And what they do is they really honor curious minds and celebrate community and feelings and food. Yes. And really through these beautiful, safe, open spaces. So just some more loveliness for your feed.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And social media really is a great way to program ourselves. I have gotten rid of all the clutter on my Instagram. Anything that makes me feel bad, I unfollow, I get rid of immediately. And I've got a beautiful feed that uplifts me. And I think part of that is a re-education. So I really encourage you guys to do that. We are really in a time of awakening. We're awakening from this sort of sleep that we've all been in. And, I don't want any of this to sound accusatory to any of our friends and allies, but again, we've been comfortable while we've sat back and let other people, multitudes of other people, suffer. We've got to all wake up and start to do better for ourselves and for others. So that's really the point of this conversation and continuing the conversation. And I hope that you guys will do that. And we are going to continue having this conversation as well, where we have another episode of A Cultural Kiki coming up sometime soon. And we really look forward to your responses and the ways that we all continue to grow as a community based on this episode and the forthcoming ones. So with that, we're going to say bye to you, and we will see you next time on A Cultural Kiki. We dance.